Welcome to the deep dive, and welcome to Inside Texas Football, powered by InsideTexas.com. I'm Paul Wadlington. The gentleman across from me is Ian Boyd. And if you like our video, I want you to subscribe on the Inside Texas Football YouTube channel. And if you're just listening on Spotify or Apple, write us a nice review, give us 5 stars, and let other people enjoy the goodness of all of this content. And if you like content in all of its forms, written, audio, video, use promo code IT1 to get 2 months of InsideTexas.com for exactly $1 measly. There used to be a thing called dollar menus, folks, and they were glorious. Inflation has put an end to those things, but we still have a dollar menu at Inside Texas. And for only 12.5 cents a week, you can get the best content about the University of Texas and, frankly, college sports in general at Inside Texas. Come join us. All right, you're joining us today, and we are taking on a rather ambitious project. We're going to talk about lies, damn lies, and statistics. That's what Mark Twain characterized statistical analysis as. And I think, as usual, Samuel Clemens had a few good points. I've also heard a great quote about statistics that I've used, which is a lot of people use statistics the way a drunk uses a lamppost for support, not illumination. So we're going to try to use a little bit of our rubric to discuss statistics as a means of illumination. And we're going to tackle something called FPI. If you're a college football fan, you may know what FPI is. And if you don't, we'll explain it to you. But this is the proprietary system that ESPN uses to power rank teams. And they power rank teams with a twist. And we'll get into that. So, Ian, what is FPI? And why is it relevant to college football fans and Texas fans, by the way?
Well, it's as you just noted, it's the main statistical system used by ESPN, the mothership, who owns and controls so much of college football. I don't know if they use it in the playoff selections. You'd think that at the very least they would get a look at it, right? But I don't know. They just pick whatever is going to make for the best television anyway. So we got here, FPI is the predictive rating systems that it'll spit out a number. So when they have a rankings for teams, you're going to get a number for each team. And that number is the expected margin of victory if they played an average team on a neutral field. And as we were talking about before the show, FPI is pretty great for handicapping games. They're going to match Vegas lines really well.
Here's an interesting thing, and I want you guys to note the third paragraph, and I also want to note that what we just put up here was written in 2016. To our knowledge, ESPN has not updated this. So they give you vague generalities. They tell you it's a power rating. They tell you that there's different metrics that go into it, and those metrics include things like your recruiting rankings. They also include your coaching tenure. How long has your coach been there? They also include things like, how did you perform the last couple of years? And those things not only inform your preseason ranking, which makes sense to some extent, they actually persist through the year. So even though you have games and you're 9 games into the season, your recruiting rankings 3 years prior still influence mildly at that point, but they still influence your FPI ranking. But I want you to read that third paragraph, Ian.
You bet.
Because ESPN is telling on themselves. Read it to the class, Ian.
Yeah, Paul, just to note, Paul is too old to read this small print, so I have to come
I can do it. I'm trying to involve you.
It is important to note what FPI is not. FPI is not a playoff predictor, and it is not designed to identify the 4 teams most deserving of making the college football playoff. ESPN has other metrics, including strength of record, that can be used to identify the most deserving teams.
Aha! Now, this is what is known as a smoking gun. Faithful, loyal producer Connor, bring up the relevant graphic of the current FPI preseason rankings. You could have done that slightly more quickly. You're disobedient in some ways, Connor, but you did still begrudgingly perform your task, so thank you. All right. Note that Texas is ranked 3rd. So, we do like FPI because it likes Texas, right? I
Yeah,
like people that like me, Ian, right?
it's a brilliant model with very few flaws.
That's right. Well, let's look out to the far right here. Percentage chance to win conference, playoffs, make national championship game, win national championship. This is derived straight from the FPI. Now, as Ian said, if you look at that, actually the fourth column, team, conference, win, loss, and FPI, the FPI number is actually reflecting what he said. This is your margin of victory, expected margin of victory on a neutral field against an average FBS team. Okay. That's exactly what they promised that FPI would deliver. But between 2016 and now, they now added these extra columns out to the far right that are telling you your percentage likelihood of winning the national championship. Very interesting, is it not?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, this is what we're going to talk about today.
So we're going to talk about that, and I think this is nothing more than like a little bit of pressure to make this relevant, right? Well, if it's not telling you who's going to the playoff, what's the point of this dumb metric, right? So it's a power ranking, not a rating, and I think people do kind of confuse those two, right? For example, an 0-4 football team that played 4 ranked teams and lost by a grand total of 17 points in those 4 contests is not going to be ranked, are they, Ian?
No.
Could they be relatively highly power rated?
Yes.
Yes.
Because if they play a good team, they're not going to perform like your typical 0-4 team. They've already shown maybe they go 0-5, but your expected margin of victory is going to be very low, and Vegas is going to handicap it tight.
Exactly right. So something that stat nerds and gamblers both understand is that wins and losses are binary metrics. You is or you ain't, right? Use either for it or use again it. But life's a little more complex than that. A life's a little more complex than the W and the L, even though there's plenty of cliches around, well, the bottom line, they lost the game. They're losers, right? Bottom line, they won the game. They're winners. Well, if you have the number 1 ranked team in the country and you kick a last second field goal against a G5 team at your home field and you win the game, not a lot of people will be saying, well, bottom line, we won the game. What they'll be saying is, we didn't play very well. Maybe we're not as good as everyone's cracking us up to be. And that's what a power ranking seeks to do. What they tell you is that 0-4 team, actually, as they get into the easier part of their schedule, is going to have a reversal probably in their season record, because W's and L's are a binary metric, and a game result is composed of a lot more than just that. So also, I want you to look at the FPI number. What's suggestive is, because you can compare these teams to an average team on a neutral field, you can then compare these teams to each other. So what does that mean? It means if the Georgia Bulldogs played the number 5 team, the Alabama Crimson Tide, on a neutral field, they're suggesting that properly handicapped, again, there's no data from the season in this, this is just projection, they should be about a 5.5 point favorite. So the gap in your FPI number is also instructive. So it really is Georgia, gap, Oregon, gap, Texas, Ohio State, Alabama, all together, and then another gap, if you guys are kind of following what we're saying here. Yeah. So that's kind of what the FPI, the value of it is. Now, does it mean it's perfect? Does it mean it's flawless? Well, we see the Oklahoma Sooners ranked in the top 10. Ian, how does that strike you?
Implausible. I believe Vegas right now, so right here, Texas is a what? 5.5 point favorite over the Sooners. And in Vegas, you can get, I think, 8.5 or 9 points right now.
You can.
If you take Oklahoma.
Yep.
So there's a discrepancy here between them and whatever Vegas has. That's interesting. Although generally they're pretty tight.
Let me give you a quick real world example because I typed in ESPN FPI is nonsense on Google. And I came up with a Reddit college football post from last year. And the poster writes, I know it's supposed to be predictive, but FPI is BS. Seriously, despite starting 4-1 and beating Arkansas, Cincinnati, and playing full strength Kansas close, BYU is ranked 55th. We're only 3 spots ahead of the 1-4 Pitt Panthers. And then they go through and list all the teams that this is an outrage. Of course, we all know how this story ends, right, Ian? BYU goes 5-7. They lose 5 of their next 6 games. They look terrible in the process of doing, and they exactly justify that FPI rating or ranking, I should say, not a rating. So the point is, over time, your quality tends to be revealed by the schedule. But the truth is, there's not enough college football games in a schedule to actually ascertain the true quality of any college football team. Is that a fair assessment, Ian? Do you agree with that?
No question. I mean, we have there was a BYU national champion in the 80s, and you look back at their schedule that they conquered to reach that championship, and they didn't play any of the teams that were seriously contending for the title that year.
Yep.
Almost a non sequitur, though. The problem with these models is that if you want to pick Georgia versus Boise State in a good year for Boise State, if you just go by season results, Boise State's schedule is not going to tell you enough about the quality of their play.
Yep.
And so these rankings have to maintain things like previous season's results and even recruiting rankings in order to weight properly. Georgia having 75% of their rosters 4 and 5 star players, right? Boise's roster is like 5% 4 and 5 star players, if that. And that's really going to matter if they actually play, but you're not going to see that in the season necessarily because they don't have enough overlapping opponents in how many FBS teams are there now? Like 130, 132, is that right?
More, yeah, a little more.
It keeps changing. And that prevents them from having enough shared opponents to get the best results.
This isn't Major League Baseball. You're not playing 162 games against multiple shared common opponents through various parts of a season. And guess what? Even though they play that many exhaustive games, when you get into a series, playing a 7-game series statistically is actually not a proof of the superior team. It's a likelihood of the superior team, but I think they did a statistical analysis. I think you have to play 31 games to get to a p-value under 5. So it's 0.05. So I don't want to get into all that. The point is, even with all of the weight of powerful statistical probability and Bayesian analysis and all these things on your side, you're still only getting an approximation because there just aren't enough games being played to give you the truth, which is fun. That's the art of it, right? There's a science to this and there's an art of it. And that's where the art enters in. And that's why it's kind of fun, right? That's why we have upsets. That's why we have improbable things happen that enrich and make the sport so fun. But the interesting thing that I want to bring up, Ian, is ESPN does describe what the FPI is comprised of. They tell you some of the components, but they don't tell you the weights of the percentages of the components, and they don't tell you the nature of the components. Let me give you 2 examples.
Yeah.
We know for a fact that coaching continuity is part of their formula. The more coaching continuity you have, the better. Why? Because they back tested it and they know that this is a true thing. What we don't know is this half a percentage point of your team's FPI? Or is it 7.5%? We don't know. Here's another example. We know that yardage differential is a part of their component, meaning offense isn't just described by your points per game, because as we know, points per game is a team metric. It is a team measure. If you have a pick six and you score on a punt return, you just added 14 points probably to your score. Did your offense do any of that? No. So what they do is they look at yardage, and specifically yardage differentials. So how much more game by game do you outgain your opponent typically? And over time, that can be a very useful metric. But if you just do raw yardage, if you don't adjust for efficiency, if you don't adjust for number of plays run, if you don't adjust for your opponent's a G5 scrub versus you played Michigan and Ann Arbor, if you don't adjust for that, it's kind of a stupid metric. FPI doesn't tell us how they adjust for that. So how useful is it for them to tell us that we use yardage differential if they don't describe it? So my question is, why is this proprietary? Why is this in a black box? Why won't they tell us the data and the formula?
Presumably so that everyone else doesn't just steal it.
But Einstein invented E equals MC squared. Are we stealing it by using his insight, or do we attribute it to him and credit him with it?
Right. I mean, that's just not how media companies and corporations tend to work, right?
You're getting warmer. Develop that theme.
They would rather guard it and be proprietary. There's also, there's any number of reasons why you might want to lean on it a little bit in a given year, either to generate results that you want it to spit out.
Yes.
Or if you have reason to believe that the model is going to miss something with one team because it doesn't have, like, let's say, I don't know, let's say there's like some off-field issues that you know about at a school. There's no way that your model is going to be able to account for that. But if you know how to I'm just gonna reflect that in coaching continuity and ding them as though they just lost their offensive coordinator or whatever, I don't know. You can do that without having to show your hand, right?
Well, that's a charitable description of what could happen, right? So what's the value of everyone understanding what the quadratic equation is?
Everyone knows the answer.
If someone provides you with an answer, a data input, you can run the equation and go, that's not correct. We all agree what the quadratic equation is. Your number differs from mine, modeler who purports to describe reality and use that description of reality to influence future events, like who gets selected for the playoff. Why would you keep this a black box? Well, typically in models, whether sports or other parts of our society, you keep a black box to give yourself an escape, to give yourself an out. Because people can't check your model and prove that you're doing something or tipping the scales. Also, proprietary things can be sold and marketed. Simple things, as you said, Ian, it's not so much that people will steal it, it's that they will make it so common and known that why would you pay for ESPN Plus to read about the latest rankings that came down for FPI? So
right.
to give a little bit of an example, if you want to get in better shape, I can say, well, it's pretty simple. Consume less calories than you burn. And people roll their, oh, how simplistic. Oh, yeah. Actually, pretty good advice. It covers 97% of what you need to know. But it's not proprietary. It's not my super duper intricate system that you need to pay $99.95 to learn that I can get you shredded in 6 weeks for pool season.
Right.
So I think that's part of it. And I think that's the mischief involved. And I think that that's what's going on here. I think it's the fact that you can change things as you need if you need to, because it's a marketing tool, but also it's something that you can charge for.
The fact that ESPN runs the playoffs is kind of that's what makes it a little nefarious, right?
Slight conflict of interest, perhaps. This is not an independent body doing its thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not like the NBA with their lottery process and who got to touch all those envelopes and things like that.
Oh
So
yeah, the famous
their
an
famous
envelope got put in the freezer and you could feel
frozen
it and
envelope. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
pull the
Make,
cold one.
make sure the Knicks get Patrick Ewing.
They
Um,
would never rig a draft for a huge media market. But yeah, look, I mean, I think without getting too nefarious, transparency is always better than opaque when it comes to modeling, because the inability to test and check your model inputs gives people license to think the most nefarious thing possible. Is that fair?
yeah,
Well, I know a gentleman that you could interact with. Well, you won't be thinking the most nefarious things possible. And he's very open about his model of excellence. His name is Gabe Winslow. He is the guy that we think you should be calling if you're doing a loan in the great state of Texas. In fact, if you're doing a loan outside of the great state of Texas, you need to call him because he's licensed in other states. And even if he can't help you, even if you won't make a dime off of it, give him a call and he'll help you out. He'll help you negotiate against your own mortgage guy with all of his superpowers and knowledge. And he's got plenty of them. Over 20 years in the industry, former National Merit Scholar, has a law degree from a top 20 law school, really, really sharp and a really good dude. And he's as much of a Longhorn nut as the rest of us. Give him a call, 832-557-1095. At the very minimum, if he's not the first call you make sure he's your last call. Run your deal by him and see if everything checks out. He's happy to help you out. Give him a call. He's good people. 832-557-1095. All right. Gabe's processes are not proprietary. They're all open source. They're all transparent. What else with FPI do we need to consider? Are there other models that are power rankings that we like better, Ian?
I don't know anymore. I used to love SP Plus, and now
Yep.
it's mostly behind a paywall. And SP Plus by my old pal and colleague Bill Connolly, he's it's gotten a little complicated in the era of the transfer portal. Like I recall, he had the 2022 Sooners rated as one of the most experienced returning production teams in the whole country.
Yep.
It was like, that's not possible, Bill. I have like 8 defensive starters leaving. But he was giving them credit for all these G5 transfers that they'd taken.
Yep.
And a lot of those G5 transfers had stats at their old school. And he didn't
Good
know how
stats.
to good stats. He didn't know how to weight it. So he just counted it as though they had done that in the Big 12 for Oklahoma the previous season. As far as I can tell. Maybe he didn't do exactly that, but it's what it seemed like he did. It couldn't have been too different from that. And so he had Oklahoma as this stacked veteran team, even though they were turning over like the entire defense, and I don't remember the details on the offense. Sure enough, the 2022 Oklahoma Sooners did not prove to be a veteran, strong, powerful team when they actually took the field.
But interestingly, didn't they actually get more wins than they should have?
What were they, like 7-6, 6-7 that year?
You know what? I completely confused them with the Lincoln Riley overachiever team with Spencer Rattler. Never mind. Yeah, of course. Yeah, they probably played exactly how they were. You're right. Yeah, I'll give you a more recent example. And by the way, this isn't criticizing Bill because I don't know how to factor the G5 transfer. We don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, do you apply an 80% modifier to their production? Do you give them full credit with the assumption that, hey, this guy was an All-American at the G5 level, he's going to be just fine? And in fact, he was handicapped by the low quality of his teammates. He was a great receiver, but he had a bad quarterback. I mean, so I don't know. But this year with Kentucky, I'm doing research for my football preview for the SEC and Texas football preview. His early SP Plus had Kentucky as one of the least experienced returning teams in the country. And I think it's just he made a mistake on the roster. Like he didn't know who was coming back or who was transferring and who was in the portal and who came back. And it turns out he just updated it and they're in the top 25 of return. So that's a big gap. And in fact, Kentucky's strength, which is their defense, has a ton of returning production. Like they're in the top 10 or 15 in the country. But he had them in like the 60s or 70s. And so, again, not knocking on Bill, it's just the transfer portal makes this all almost impossible. And so, similarly, how is FPI adjusting for that? We don't even know. I mean, they have to give you credit. They have to give Texas credit for Trey Moore. But
Yeah.
what sort of credit? Do we just treat him as a solid FBS starter? I don't know.
Yeah. Some of these, I feel like I can guess on some of them, and some of them they are just like impossible. Like an offense, my beloved Space Force positions, the guys that have to get into the one-on-one athletic battles, like your tackle, your cornerback, your wide receiver. Those are the ones that are really, really hard to tell. Like a linebacker who's really good at the G5 level, he's probably going to be pretty good at a higher level too, because the game is at that position. It's so technique and recognition based and mental. Safeties, kind of the same story. You see safeties go up a level all the time and have success. A cornerback, though, or a receiver, that's tough because they may have never seen another 4-4 guy before until they get to their new school. Those guys, they actually generally do translate pretty well, but it's just such a huge jump in competition, it's hard to say. And then the big guys are where it's really difficult. Like sometimes you have this dude that would just like exploded out of nowhere as a defensive tackle or left tackle or whatever at the smaller school. And it's like, this guy's an NFL player. He's just was hidden before. And now it's like, oh wait, this guy's a freak. And then you have the guys that are like 6'8", 320, 4-year starter at Tulane or something, developed pretty good technique, know how to use their size. But then they go maybe to the SEC and they face NFL edge rushers, and it's like, oh, wait, this guy is no chance. And it's hard to – you can watch all their film, and it's still hard to know for sure.
Yeah, I mean, a quick example. I watched all of Trey Moore's film at UTSA, and you watch his highlights, right? And most of his sacks are running down a guy from a broken pocket because UTSA blitzed. Mm-hmm. And so you shrug and go, I don't know, is this going to translate? Well, then you hear he gets to Texas, and he looks quick on film, but I don't know. Like, how does that correspond? He's going against Memphis or whoever, right? He gets to UT, and the first thing you hear in just informal workouts, shorts and T-shirts, is like, Trey Moore is real quick. Like everyone was like, whoa, this guy moves real well. And the film probably undersold it. So kind of interesting. Hey, I'll flip it. We don't know about how G5 guys will level up or guys from the lower tier of FBS will level up to the SEC. What about when you include recruiting in FPI and you include previous recruiting rankings? Let's not even get into development, right, which is a huge part of this. But also, how do you deal with the former 5-star at Bama who in 3 years does nothing there and transfers to TCU? Did TCU just got a 5-star? Is that how that works? Or if we knocked him down to kind of a 3-star because he never dented the lineup at Bama? And why didn't he? Was he injured? Is he not very good? Like, how do you give that credit? I mean, and by the way, it's two pieces of that. Bama lost a 5-star, and TCU gained a 5-star. So how does that go into your proprietary formula, which you won't reveal? Like, how? And I'm asking this: if you or I were asked to do a power ranking, how would we account for that?
Well, you know what you could do, but it would not work so well unless you're proprietary. Is you could take On3's transfer rankings, because On3 will give a guy a ranking when he goes into the transfer portal. They'll have his original recruiting ranking, and then they'll have his transfer ranking. So a lot of times guys go up or down significantly, right?
So you take the gap?
You could just take the transfer ranking. You could just scrape it and use On3's scouting of what this player is now.
Right.
And then plug it into your recruiting input in your proprietary model. But then if you had to show your work you'd have to show that you're using 24/7 or on threes scouting and evaluations,
Yeah.
instead of your own ESPN recruiting rankings, right?
Yeah, it's very difficult. You also run into just the basic, how do you weight a size of a recruiting class? So there's individual years where, say, USC signed 16 guys, but they have a very high class average. But then there were years when you could game the system where Auburn would sign 34 dudes, and 27 of them were 3-stars. But the simple volume of adding that many 3-stars is actually a big juicing, right? Because you can sort through them, put a bunch of them in the portal, trapdoor a bunch. But then the dudes who pan are dudes. They're great players. So do we have an exact formula? Are you just going to use potential for NFL? A broad 3-star ranking of this is your likelihood of becoming an NFL draft pick versus the 5-star. And then you take that differential. I mean, this stuff can get really complicated. And a lot of it's like just your opinion, man. Like subjectively, what do you value? And there's no science to that assignation, and we don't have enough time to backtest it. And by the way, backtesting, people are like, well, that's the perfect solution. Backtesting is how you get the really stupid Vegas hooks that they use to get dumb people to bet, which is after losing in a night game against a rival, Texas is 31-1 historically the following week, right? And people are like, oh, I'm betting Texas all in. That statistic wasn't derived in a progressive forward projecting way. It's literally guys assigning some intern at a Vegas tout shop saying, hey, go find me a BS statistic that's backdated and we'll release it and get a bunch of suckers and remove this line a half point.
And us in the media will be all over it because we'll be like, that has to mean something.
ESPN color guys, they'll bring up the graphic. You know, Dabo Swinney, since he's been at Clemson, is 47-0 when leading at halftime. And you're like, well, that makes sense. But right now, he's up by a point, and his quarterback just threw a pick six, and it looks like Florida State is like gotten their sea legs. So this is about to be 47-1. Like, don't bet this as if this is prescriptive. So yeah, I think that is an example of how I began this podcast and this YouTube video, which is don't use statistics for support rather than illumination, because you're just the drunk leaning against a lamppost and you're not shedding any light on anything. So Ian, with that, do you have any final thoughts on this? We're not here to bury FPI, but we are here to help people understand its context. And is there anything we should add before we say goodbye to the people?
Yeah, I will add, don't use their playoff projection percentages or their championship projection percentages. Because they told you when they unveiled it, it's basically a good handicapping tool.
Yes.
But when you're trying to project out to the playoffs, I mean, there's just so many things that'll go wrong there. Like, how do you value the different seeds? Like, did they really spit this out with the understanding that, like, the 3rd seed is going to be the ACC champion, the 4 seed is going to be a Big 12 champion, the 12 seed is going to be Liberty, the 5 seed
and
is
do they really understand the implications that the 5 seed, though they have to play an extra game, might have a favorable path to the title game?
And the 5 seed potentially didn't play a conference championship game.
Correct.
Like, that's a debate right now. If you're in the SEC, do you want to play the conference championship game and risk the beatdown and the injury to your roster for a chance at that number 1 or number 2 seed? Or would you rather be like, I'd rather not play that game, give me the extra game against Liberty, and then in the second round I get to play the Big 12 champion?
Yeah, the danger of all models which have inputs that cannot be anticipated,
yes,
is that this is a model. And humans act on models in ways that models do not anticipate.
So last year, they had, when they released this rankings at this time of the year, now they update them as the season goes on and they get better. As do all of our understanding of who's good and not in college football gets better when the games actually happen. At this time last year, they had Ohio State number 1, with a 36.7% chance of winning the national championship, which is high. I thought too high at the time. I was vindicated, I would argue. Number 2, they had Alabama with a 20.4% chance. 3, Georgia, 19.1. Cliff, Texas, 5.7% chance. Michigan, they had 6th preseason with a 3.9% chance of winning the national championship. Washington, they had like outside the top 12. Totally off the deal. Now they could say, well, that Washington didn't win, did they? But these percentages are always completely bogus. Never believe percentages from a model, ever.
Well, our little sleuthing at the beginning of this broadcast demonstrates that. In 2016, they explicitly say this is not an attempt to project the playoffs. So I guess the question that is something we may answer in a future attempt is, what should we be using for that? And then also, where do we go for useful data on those sorts of inputs? Or is it just sort of like your opinion, man?
Not to spoil anything, but it needs to be number 2.
What needs to be number 2?
Your conclusion needs to be, take all these information, but we can just form opinions.
That's it.
My buddy Charks, when he was in the hospital, he was like, he told me one time, these doctors, I mean, they're basically doing the same thing I do. They got a bunch of different stats. They have a couple different ways of looking at things, and then they just come into your room and then they drop takes. And they're like, I think it's this. It could be this. We're going to try this. It's not. He's like, it's amazing to see. It's kind of terrifying to see, but it's really no different. There's no actual certainty. They're just better at producing medicinal takes than you are.
It always helps to wear a white lab coat as well. Your power and imprimatur improves by 47%. And I just made up that statistic, which is the whole point of this whole show. So for Ian Boyd, I am Paul Wadlington saying thank you for coming on the deep dive and listening to us rant and talk and try to elucidate this. Also, use promo code IT1 to get 2 months of InsideTexas.com for $1. And if you're listening to this on Spotify, iTunes, whatever, give us 5 stars, write a nice review, tell us some good things. And then finally, use our sponsors, and specifically the sponsor of this broadcast, Gabe Winslow. You can reach him at 832-557-1095. He's going to solve all of your mortgage needs, and he won't have to use modeling to do it. He just is good at what he does. Just like my friend Ian Boyd, I'm Paul Wadlington saying adios, mahalo, and hook 'em.